The sun was blazing high in the sky, turning the Santa Monica promenade into a bright, noisy oven. It was one of those afternoons where the heat seemed to rise right off the pavement, making the air shimmer and dance. For most people, it was a beautiful day to be near the ocean. The smell of salt water mixed with the greasy, tempting scent of fried food from the street vendors. Tourists walked slowly, holding ice cream cones and mapping out their next stop on their phones. They had nowhere to be, but Jenny was not a tourist. She was not here to enjoy the view. She was walking fast, her heels clicking loudly on the concrete walkway, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. She checked her watch for the 10th time in 2 minutes. She was late. Not just a little late, but the kind of late that makes you lose opportunities. She was on her way to a job interview at a small real estate office just a few blocks away. It wasn't her dream job, but right now, dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed a paycheck. She needed it badly. Jenny wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. She felt gross. Her good blazer felt too tight, sticking to her back in the heat. She hadn't slept well in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the red numbers on the bills piling up on her kitchen table. She thought about her father, sitting alone in his hospital room, waiting for news that wasn't coming. The weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe, let alone walk with confidence. She felt invisible, like a ghost moving through a world of happy, living people. She tried to take a shortcut through a narrow path that ran between a gift shop and an outdoor cafe. It was shaded by large canvas umbrellas, offering a tiny break from the sun. She picked up her pace, clutching her folder to her chest. It held her resume, printed on the last decent paper she had left. She couldn't mess this up. As she hurried around a large potted palm tree, she wasn't looking where she was going. She was looking at her feet, watching out for cracks in the sidewalk. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shade of the umbrellas right into her path. There was no time to stop. Jenny collided with the person hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the concrete. She didn't fall, but she did drop her folder. Papers went everywhere, sliding under chairs and fluttering in the breeze. "Hey," she gasped, more out of shock than anger. She looked up, ready to apologize, but the words died in her throat. The man she had bumped into was tall and thin, dressed in a faded gray hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked messy, unshaven, and tired. He didn't look like a typical California surfer or a wealthy cafe patron. He looked like someone who had been up all night. He was holding a phone to his ear, and he hadn't even stumbled when they hit. He was like a rock. The man didn't say, "Excuse me." He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't even look down at the papers scattered on the ground. He just kept talking on the phone. His voice was rough, loud, and filled with a sharp, jagged frustration. "I don't care about the cost," the man snapped into the phone, his jaw clenched tight. "I told you to fix it, just get it done. I don't have time for this. If you can't handle it, I'll find someone who can. Just send the money and sort it out." Jenny froze. She was kneeling on the hard ground, scraping her knees to gather her resume, but her hands stopped moving. The man's words hung in the hot air. To anyone else, it might have just sounded like a busy businessman dealing with a problem. But to Jenny, in that moment, it sounded like something else entirely. She heard the arrogance. She heard the impatience. She heard, "I have money, you don't, so do what I say." It made her blood boil. Here she was, fighting for every dollar, terrified she wouldn't be able to pay for her dad's medicine, fighting just to keep her head above water. And this guy in his expensive hoodie was screaming about throwing money at a problem because he was inconvenienced. He didn't even notice her. He was pacing back and forth, his back to her now, still barking orders into the phone. "Well, make it happen," he yelled. "That's what I pay you for?" The unfairness of it all hit Jenny like a truck. She was tired of being pushed around. She was tired of feeling small. She was tired of people with money stepping on people without it. The stress of the morning, the fear of the interview, the worry for her father, it all mixed together into a hot, explosive cocktail in her chest. She stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure rage. "Hey," Jenny said, her voice loud and sharp. The man ignored her. He turned slightly, still talking, looking out at the street traffic. "Hey," she said again, louder this time. "I'm talking to you." The man stopped pacing. He lowered the phone from his ear and turned around slowly. He looked at her, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He looked annoyed. He looked at her like she was a nuisance, like a fly buzzing around his head. "What?" he asked. His voice was flat. "I'm busy." That was it. That one word was the spark in the room full of gas. Jenny saw red. She didn't think about the consequences. She didn't think about the fact that she was in a public place. She didn't think about the job interview she was running late for. She just reacted. She stepped forward and swung her hand with all the strength she had left in her tired body. Smack, the sound was incredibly loud, cutting through the ambient noise of the street. It echoed off the brick walls of the cafe. Her palm connected flat against his cheek with a force that jarred her whole arm. For a second, time seemed to stop completely. The man's head snapped to the side. His phone slipped from his fingers and fell onto the grass with a soft thud. The people sitting at the nearby tables went silent. Forks stopped clinking against plates. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Everyone was staring. Jenny stood there, her chest heaving, her hand stinging intensely. She looked at the man, waiting for him to yell back, waiting for him to call security, waiting for the fight she had just started. But the man didn't yell. He didn't move to hit her back. He slowly turned his face back to look at her. He brought a hand up to touch his cheek, which was already turning a bright, angry red. He looked at her with eyes that weren't filled with the anger she expected. He didn't look like a powerful businessman anymore. He looked shocked. He looked hurt. And behind the shock, there was a deep, profound sadness in his eyes that made Jenny's stomach drop. He looked at her not like she was a criminal, but like she was a person in pain, too. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He glanced at the crowd watching them, then back at Jenny. He let out a long, slow breath, the fight draining out of his posture instantly. He looked down at the ground, then bent over to pick up his phone, moving slowly like he was moving through water. The man stood up slowly, clutching his phone in one hand while the other hovered near his face. The air around them felt thick and heavy, charged with the electricity of what had just happened. The stinging sensation in Jenny's palm was sharp, but the silence that followed was even louder. She expected shouting. She expected security guards to come running from the nearby shops. She expected him to scream back or maybe even threaten to sue her. That is how people usually reacted in this city when things went wrong. They got loud. They got defensive, but he didn't do any of that. He just looked at her. His eyes were dark and incredibly expressive, holding a look of total confusion. It wasn't the look of a man who was used to being hit. It was the look of someone who had just been struck by lightning while standing on a clear, sunny day. Jenny started to say, but her voice felt small and weak. The anger that had fueled her a moment ago was draining away, leaving behind a cold, sinking feeling in her gut. She looked at the red mark on his cheek. It was vivid against his pale skin. The man blinked a few times, processing the moment. He took a step back, putting a respectful distance between them, as if he was the one who had done something wrong. He glanced down at the papers still scattered on the ground near his feet. He saw the resume, the crumpled edges, the desperation in the ink. He didn't ask her why she did it. He didn't demand an apology. Instead, he bent down. Jenny flinched, thinking he was going to throw something at her, but he simply reached out and picked up the main page of her resume. He held it carefully by the edges, smoothing out a wrinkle with a gentle thumb. He handed the paper to her. Their fingers brushed for a split second, and she noticed how rough his hands were. He didn't look her in the eye as he passed it over. He looked at the ground, almost ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper, and it was incredibly soft. The harsh, demanding tone from the phone call was completely gone. "I didn't mean to bump into you. I was distracted. I hope you get the job." Jenny stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hand. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She had just assaulted a stranger on the street, and he was apologizing to her. He was wishing her luck. It didn't make any sense. Her mind was racing, trying to catch up with reality, but her feet felt like they were cemented to the pavement. He gave her a small, sad nod, a gesture that felt more like a bow than a simple greeting. Then, without another word, he turned around. He didn't run. He didn't storm off in a fit of rage. He just walked away with his shoulders slumped forward, his hands deep in the pockets of his worn-out hoodie. He moved toward the low iron fence that separated the cafe patio from the walking path. He leaned against the fence, looking out at the glittering ocean, turning his back on the crowd and on Jenny. Jenny watched him go. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her feeling shaky and lightheaded. She looked down at her resume. There was a smudge of dirt on the corner, but it was otherwise intact. She hugged the folder to her chest, suddenly feeling very exposed. The people at the nearby tables were still staring. Some were whispering behind their hands. A woman in a large sun hat looked at Jenny with open judgment. "Did you see that?" A man in a denim shirt whispered loudly to his companion. "She just slapped him." Crazy, Jenny felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She needed to get out of here. She was already late for the interview, and now she had made a scene. She quickly gathered the rest of her things, shoving them into her bag without bothering to organize them. She threw one last look at the man standing by the fence. He hadn't moved. He was just staring at the water, looking incredibly lonely in the middle of the busy, happy crowd. She turned and started walking briskly in the opposite direction. Her heart was still beating too fast. Why did I do that? She thought to herself over and over again. What is wrong with me? She wasn't a violent person. She didn't go around hitting people. But the stress had been like a dam ready to burst, and he had been the unlucky crack in the wall. She tried to focus on the interview. She tried to mentally prepare her answers about her sales experience and her organizational skills. But the image of his face kept floating into her mind. It wasn't the anger she expected. It was the sadness. It was the way he had picked up her resume. As she walked further down the promenade, the noise of the cafe faded behind her. She passed street performers playing guitars and artists selling paintings. The world was moving on, but she felt stuck in that moment of impact. Her hand was still throbbing, a constant reminder of her mistake. She found a small public bench a few hundred yards away and sat down, needing a moment to compose herself before she walked into the office building. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. She looked messy. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity, and her eyes were wide and panicked. "It's fine," she whispered to herself. "Just go in there, do the interview, forget about it." He's probably already forgotten it. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. You don't just forget getting slapped in the middle of the day. And she couldn't shake the feeling that she had misjudged the situation completely. The voice on the phone, she had been so sure it was arrogance. But when he had spoken to her, there was no arrogance. There was only gentleness. A man that arrogant wouldn't have apologized. He wouldn't have cared about her resume. She stood up to keep walking, but her curiosity got the better of her. She pulled out her phone and opened a browser, her fingers moving automatically. She didn't know why she felt the need to look, but she did. She needed to know who he was. She needed to know if she had just ruined the day of a normal guy or someone dangerous. She typed in bearded actor hoodie Santa Monica and hit search. She didn't have a clear photo of him, just the mental image of the side of his face and the dark, messy hair. She scrolled through the results, mostly just gossip articles and random photos. Then, she saw a picture from a fan account posted 20 minutes ago. It was a grainy shot of a man in a gray hoodie walking near a coffee shop. The caption read, "Spotted Keanu Reeves looking super down today. Hope he's okay." Jenny felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath her. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. She stared at the photo, the shape of the nose, the slouch of the shoulders. The baseball cap, Keanu Reeves. She sat back down on the bench hard, her legs wouldn't hold her up. Keanu Reeves, the actor, the guy from the action movies. The guy everyone said was the nicest man in Hollywood. She remembered the stories she had heard over the years. Things people had said on talk shows or in interviews. How he gave away his money from the Matrix to the special effects team. How he rode the subway. How he had faced terrible tragedies in his life. Losing his daughter, losing his partner, and still remained kind. She looked back in the direction of the cafe, but she was too far away to see the fence now. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, the phone call she had overheard. "I don't care about the cost, just get it done, send the money." He hadn't been yelling about a stock market deal. He hadn't been screaming at an assistant because his coffee was cold. He was likely trying to help someone. He was likely using his money to fix a problem for a friend or a charity. That was what he did. That was who he was, and she had slapped him. She had physically assaulted one of the kindest people on the planet because he was having a bad day on the phone. Jenny put her face in her hands. The humiliation was burning hot on her skin. She felt sick. The job interview didn't matter anymore. Her bills didn't matter. All she could think about was the look in his eyes when he handed her the resume. He hadn't been angry at her. He had looked at her with pity. He saw a woman who was struggling, and instead of fighting back, he had tried to help her pick up the pieces. She had to go back. The thought popped into her head instantly. She couldn't just leave it like this. She couldn't let him think that everyone in the world was crazy and violent. She needed to find him. She needed to explain. She needed to apologize, really apologize, not just stand there like a statue. She stood up, her mind made up. She wasn't going to the interview. She couldn't face a panel of judges and pretend to be a competent, professional person when she had just acted like a monster. She turned around and started walking back toward the cafe, her heart pounding harder than it had when she was running late. She had to find him. She had to hope he hadn't disappeared into the city. The walk back to the cafe felt much longer than the walk away. The sun seemed to have moved directly overhead, beating down on Jenny's neck with an intensity that made her head throb. The folder under her arm, which held her resume and her future, felt heavy and awkward, like a brick she was forced to carry. Every step was a battle against the urge to just turn around and run the other way. Her mind was screaming at her to go home, to hide under the covers, to pretend this day never happened. But her feet kept moving. She pushed past a group of tourists taking a selfie in front of a souvenir shop. Their laughter rang out, bright and carefree, and it grated on Jenny's nerves. How could the world still be spinning? How could people still be laughing when she had just done something so terrible? She felt like she was walking through a different dimension, separated from everyone else by a thick wall of glass. She was the villain in this story. She was the person who ruined a nice day. As she got closer to the outdoor cafe, her heart rate picked up again. She scanned the area, her eyes darting from table to table, looking for the gray hoodie. Part of her hoped he was gone. If he was gone, she wouldn't have to face him. She could just tell herself she was sorry and move on. But a bigger part of her knew that wasn't enough. You can't slap someone and just walk away. Not really, especially not when that someone was him. She reached the spot where the collision had happened. The ground was clear, no papers, no phone. The iron fence where he had been leaning was empty. A server was wiping down the table nearby, clearing away a coffee cup. Jenny stopped. She felt a sudden wave of panic. He was gone. She had missed her chance. She stood there for a moment, feeling lost, clutching her folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked up and down the promenade, but there were too many people. It was a sea of faces, and none of them were the one she was looking for. "Can I get you anything, miss?" a voice asked. Jenny jumped. She turned to see the server standing there. He was a young guy, maybe 20, with a kind face and an apron tied around his waist. He was looking at her with a polite smile, but then his eyes narrowed slightly as he recognized her. "Wait," he said slowly. "You're the woman from before, aren't you? The one who—" He trailed off, not wanting to say the word. The shame washed over Jenny again, hot and uncomfortable. She nodded, unable to speak. She felt like a child being scolded by a teacher. I came back to apologize," Jenny stammered. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake, is he?" "Did he say where he was going?" The server sighed, leaning against the table. He looked out toward the ocean, shaking his head slightly. "He didn't say much. He just paid for his coffee and left." "Was he angry?" Jenny asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Did he call the police?" The server looked at her, surprised. "Police, no. He didn't mention you at all, he just looked, I don't know, he looked heartbroken." The word hit Jenny like a punch to the stomach, heartbroken. "He comes here sometimes," the server continued, his voice softening. "Not to be seen, but just to sit. People usually leave him alone, but sometimes they bug him for photos. Today, he was already having a rough time before you ran into him." Jenny felt the tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of a stranger. "I didn't know," she said. "I heard him on the phone. I thought he was just another rich guy being rude. I didn't know it was him." "It's Keanu, right?" the server asked quietly. Jenny nodded again. "Yeah, it's Keanu." The server whistled low under his breath. "Wow, you slapped Keanu Reeves. That's bold." He didn't say it meanly, just with a sense of disbelief. "Look, I don't know where he went, but he usually walks that way when he wants to be alone." He pointed down the path toward the quieter end of the beach, where the tourists thinned out and the sand became whiter. "Thanks," Jenny said. She turned to leave, but the server spoke again. "Hey," he said, For what it's worth, he seemed like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Maybe he just needed someone to listen, or maybe he just needed to be left alone. But I don't think he's the type to hold a grudge. Jenny hoped he was right. She gave the server a small, grateful nod and started walking in the direction he had pointed. As she walked, she pulled out her phone again. She needed to understand. She needed to know what kind of pain she had added to. She opened the browser and navigated to a news site. The headline was right there at the top of the entertainment section. Keanu Reeves spotted in distress. She clicked on the article. It was mostly speculation, filled with blurry photos and rumors, but one paragraph stood out. Sources close to the actor say he has recently suffered another devastating personal loss. While details are private, those who know him say he has withdrawn from the public eye to grieve. Jenny stopped walking. She leaned against a concrete barrier that separated the path from the dunes. The wind coming off the ocean was cool, but she felt hot all over. Another loss. She remembered the stories from years ago. The baby girl who was born still, the partner who died in a car crash. He had endured the kind of tragedy that would break most people completely. And yet he was always polite. He was always kind. He was the guy who gave up his seat on the subway. He was the guy who bought a whole ice cream shop just to give free treats to the crew. And she had slapped him. She thought back to the phone call, the words she had judged so harshly. I don't care about the cost, just send the money. It wasn't arrogance, it was desperation. It was likely him trying to pay for a medical treatment, or a funeral, or help for a friend in need. He was trying to use his money to fix a problem that money couldn't actually fix. He was trying to do good in the middle of his own hell. Jenny felt sick. The contrast between her own behavior and his was like a mirror showing her the ugliest version of herself. She was stressed about a job interview and bills. Those were real problems, yes, but she had taken her stress out on a grieving man because he was in her way. She had let her anger turn her into a bully. I am so stupid, she whispered to the empty air. I am so stupid. She looked down the path. It stretched out ahead of her, curving around the coastline. It was a long walk. She could still turn back. She could go to her interview, pretend she didn't see the article, pretend she didn't know. But she knew, once you know something, you can't unknow it. She started walking again, faster this time. She needed to find him. She didn't have a grand speech prepared. She didn't have a gift to offer. She just had her apology. It felt small and inadequate, but it was all she had. She just hoped he would let her give it to him. She passed a few joggers and an old man walking a dog, but she didn't really see them. Her eyes were scanning the benches, the shaded areas under the trees, the overlooks. Every time she saw a gray hoodie, her heart leaped, only to sink when it turned out to be a teenager or a tourist. The further she walked, the fewer people there were. The noise of the city faded away, replaced by the rhythmic crashing of the waves. It was peaceful here, the kind of place you go when you want to disappear. It made sense that he would come here. After about 20 minutes of walking, she saw a figure sitting on a bench in the distance. The bench was isolated, facing the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The person was sitting still, hunched over slightly. Jenny slowed down. She was afraid to get too close in case it wasn't him. But as she got nearer, she recognized the slope of his shoulders and the messy hair peeking out from under the baseball cap. It was him. He was holding a small, crumpled coffee cup in both hands, staring out at the water like he was waiting for something to wash up on the shore. He looked so small from behind, so lonely. Jenny stopped about 10 feet away. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She didn't want to startle him again. She didn't want him to think she was coming back to hurt him. She just wanted him to know that she knew. She wanted him to know that she was sorry. The wind blew a piece of hair across her face and she tucked it behind her ear. This was it. The moment she would have to face the consequence of her anger. She took a step forward, her shoes making a soft, crunching sound on the gravel path. He didn't turn around. He was lost in his own world, a world of sadness and memories that she couldn't even imagine. She had to do this. She couldn't walk away now. She cleared her throat softly, and the man on the bench stiffened. He didn't turn around, not yet, but she knew he had heard her. The air between them was heavy, waiting for her to speak. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to get louder as she stood there. Or maybe it was just the pounding of blood in her own ears. The man on the bench didn't turn around immediately. He sat very still, his shoulders hunched forward as if he were trying to make himself as small as possible. The gray hoodie looked even more worn up close, faded by the sun and washed so many times the fabric was soft and thin. He knew someone was there. She could tell by the way his grip on the coffee cup tightened slightly, his knuckles turning white. But he didn't turn. He just kept looking out at the endless blue water, perhaps hoping that if he ignored the presence behind him, it would just fade away like the foam on the sand. Jenny took a deep, shaky breath. She felt like her legs were made of lead. Every instinct in her body was telling her to run. This was a mistake. He didn't want to be bothered. He didn't want to see the person who had hit him. But she forced her feet to stay planted. She owed him this. She owed him more than just walking away. She took a small step forward. The gravel crunched under her shoe, a sharp noise in the quiet air. Slowly, the man turned his head. When he saw her, his reaction wasn't what she expected. He didn't stand up to fight. He didn't yell for help. He didn't even look angry. His eyes, which were a deep, dark brown, just widened in surprise. They flickered down to her hands, perhaps checking to see if she was going to strike him again, and then back up to her face. He looked guarded, wary, like an animal that had been kicked one too many times and was waiting for the next blow. "You," he said quietly. His voice was raspy, tired. "It's me," Jenny said, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat, trying to sound steady, but it was useless. I came back." He looked at her for a long moment, then turned his body slightly on the bench, creating a tiny space between him and the armrest. He didn't invite her to sit, but he didn't tell her to leave either. He just waited. Jenny took that as a sign. She walked over and sat down on the far edge of the bench. She left a good 2 feet of space between them. She didn't want to invade his personal space again. She clasped her hands together in her lap to stop them from shaking. "I know who you are," she blurted out, the words rushing out of her. She hadn't planned to start with that, but it felt like the most important thing to say. The man raised an eyebrow slightly, a shadow of a frown crossing his face. He adjusted his baseball cap, pulling the brim down a little lower. "Do you?" he asked. He didn't sound arrogant. He sounded tired of being recognized. "Yes," Jenny said. "I saw a photo online. A fan took it just a few minutes ago. I know you're him. I know you're Keanu." He let out a long, slow breath through his nose and looked back out at the ocean. "Okay," he said simply. "And I am so sorry," Jenny continued, the tears finally spilling over and running hot down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She wanted him to see them. She wanted him to know she meant it. "I made a terrible mistake. I heard you on the phone and I judged you. I thought you were just some rich guy yelling about money because you were arrogant. I thought you were stepping on me because you thought you were better than me." She stopped to take a breath, her chest heaving. "I was having a bad morning, a bad life, really. I'm late for a job interview I probably won't get, and I'm worried about my dad, and I was just so angry. I took it all out on you. I saw a target and I snapped." The man listened. He didn't look at her while she spoke. He watched the seagulls diving into the water. But she knew he was listening. His posture was tense, but he was there. "And then I found out who you were," Jenny whispered. "And then I read the news. I saw the headlines about what you're going through, about your loss." She saw him flinch. It was a tiny movement, a slight twitch of his shoulder, but it was there. "And I felt like the worst person in the world," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You weren't yelling about stocks or cars. You were probably trying to help someone. You were dealing with actual pain, real grief, and I hit you. I added to your pain because I was selfish. I am so sorry." There was a long silence after she finished speaking. The only sounds were the wind and the rhythmic crashing of the waves. Jenny sat there, exposed and vulnerable. She waited for him to tell her to get lost. She waited for him to say that her apology meant nothing. She would have accepted that. She deserved that. But the man didn't say anything mean. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. He looked at her tear-stained face and her trembling hands. The guarded look in his eyes softened just a little. He saw the exhaustion in her, the same way she had seen the sadness in him earlier. "We're all carrying heavy things," he said softly. His voice was so gentle that it made Jenny cry harder. It wasn't a dismissive comment. It wasn't a platitude. It sounded like a hard-earned truth. He reached up and rubbed his cheek, the red mark from her slap still visible against his skin. "It hurts," he admitted, touching his face. "Physically it hurts, but I've had worse." He gave a small, sad shrug, and emotionally. I've had worse days than today, too. Jenny looked at him, shocked by his forgiveness. You should be pressing charges, she said. You should be screaming at me. Does screaming help? He asked. It sounded like a genuine question. Sometimes, Jenny admitted with a wet sniffle, it feels like it does. Maybe, he said. He looked down at his coffee cup. He seemed to be thinking about his own grief, his own anger at the universe. But it doesn't fix anything. It just makes more noise. He turned his body toward her a little more, closing the small gap of distance between them. You were rushing to an interview. You said you need a job? Jenny nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Yeah, real estate. I'm not very good at it, but I need the money. Don't give up on it, he said. Even if you're late, even if you think you won't get it, you never know what people are looking for. Sometimes they're looking for someone who cares enough to come back and fix a mistake. Jenny looked at him, blinking. You think I should still go? Yes, he said firmly. Go, do the best you can. Don't let your anger ruin your day twice. Once is enough. He looked back out at the water, and for a moment he looked incredibly old and incredibly young at the same time. He looked like a man who had seen the darkest parts of life and was still walking through them. Is your family going to be okay? Jenny asked quietly. She hesitated to ask, knowing it was personal, but she felt they had passed the point of polite strangers. Keanu stared at the horizon. He didn't answer right away. He seemed to be weighing the truth in his mind. No, he said finally, his voice barely audible over the wind. They aren't, not really. Jenny felt a fresh wave of sadness for him. It was such an honest, heartbreaking answer. He didn't give her the fake Hollywood smile. He didn't say, it will all work out. He just told the truth. But, he added, turning to look at her again, we have to keep going, we have to get up and walk, that's the only way through. He looked at his watch, then back at her. You should go. If you don't leave now, you'll definitely be too late. Jenny realized he was right. She had stayed longer than she intended. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling a little stronger. She looked down at him, sitting there on the bench with his crumpled coffee cup. He looked like a statue of grief, solitary and strong. Thank you, she said, for listening. For not hating me. I don't hate you, he said, looking up at her. The sun was behind her, casting a shadow over his face, but she could see the faintest hint of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. We're all just trying to survive the day, right? Right, Jenny said. Go get the job, he said. Jenny nodded. She turned and began walking back toward the city. She didn't run this time. She walked with a slower, more deliberate pace. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because she knew he wanted to be alone. She had intruded on his grief enough for one day. But as she walked, the crushing weight on her chest felt lighter. The shame was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, gratitude. She had met a stranger who taught her more about forgiveness in 10 minutes than she had learned in her entire life. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her hair, and picked up her pace. She was going to go to that interview, and she was going to tell the truth. She was going to tell them she was late because she had to apologize for a mistake. And somehow, she knew everything was going to be okay. The walk back to the main street felt different. The air was still hot, and the sun was still bright, but the crushing weight on Jenny's chest had lightened. It wasn't gone completely. Her problems were still waiting for her, just like the tall office building waiting in the distance. But the sharp edge of panic had been smoothed away. She thought about the man on the bench. He was carrying a grief so heavy it must have felt like lead in his pockets every single day, yet he still found the space to tell her to keep going. He didn't have to do that. He could have told her to get lost. He could have ignored her. Instead, he gave her a gift, permission to forgive herself. She checked her watch. She was 20 minutes late. Common sense said to turn around. Common sense said that no one hires someone who is 20 minutes late to an interview without a good excuse. But as she hurried down the sidewalk, her heels clicking rhythmically, she remembered his words. Don't let your anger ruin your day twice. She wasn't going to let it ruin her day. She was going to walk into that building, tell the truth, and accept whatever happened. The real estate office was located on the 4th floor of a modern glass building. When Jenny stepped through the automatic sliding doors into the lobby, the blast of air conditioning hit her like a cool wave. It was a sharp contrast to the heat outside. She walked to the elevator bank, pressing the button with a trembling finger. As she waited, she caught her reflection in the chrome doors of the elevator. She looked a mess. Her hair was windswept, her nose was red from crying, and there was a distinct smudge of dirt on her cheek from where she had wiped away sweat. She quickly tried to smooth her hair, but then she stopped. This was who she was right now, a woman who was fighting, a woman who made mistakes. She let her hair fall where it wanted. The elevator ride was short, but it felt like an eternity. When the doors dinged open on the fourth floor, she stepped out into a plush, quiet corridor. The carpet was thick and gray, swallowing the sound of her footsteps. At the end of the hall, there was a glass partition with the company logo etched on it. Inside, she could see a reception area. Jenny took a deep breath and walked to the glass door. She pulled it open. It was light and made of frosted glass, not heavy wood, and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up. She was a polished woman with impeccable makeup and a headset. She glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at Jenny. Her expression was polite but cold. "Jenny?" she asked. "Yes," Jenny said. "I'm here for the interview with Mr. Henderson. I know I'm late." "Mr. Henderson is with another candidate," the receptionist said, typing something on her computer. "I'm not sure if he'll have time to see you now. You were scheduled for 2 o'clock. "I know," Jenny said. She stood her ground. She didn't make up a story about traffic. She didn't blame the bus. "Something happened on the way here, an emergency. I had to go back and fix a mistake I made. It was important." The receptionist paused. She looked at Jenny, really looked at her, taking in the red eyes and the disheveled clothes. Usually late candidates made excuses. They blamed the world. This woman was just standing there, exhausted but honest. The receptionist sighed softly and picked up the phone. She pressed a button. "Mr. Henderson? Yes, I have Jenny here. She just arrived." "I know. Yes, I understand. Okay." She put the phone down. "Go on in. He's finishing up a call. You have 5 minutes to impress him." "Thank you," Jenny said sincerely. She walked to the door marked with the manager's name. She knocked once and pushed it open. The office was large and bright, overlooking the street below. A man in a suit stood by the window, holding a phone to his ear. He waved her in without turning around. Jenny walked to the chair in front of his desk and sat down. She placed her crumpled folder on the desk. It looked pathetic next to his neat stacks of paper. Mr. Henderson hung up the phone and turned around. He was an older man with silver hair and a stern face. He sat down and looked at his watch, then he looked at Jenny. "You're late," he said. "Yes, sir," Jenny said. Her voice was steady. I have a policy of not hiring people who can't manage their time," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Time is money in this business." "I understand," Jenny said. "And I would usually accept that. But today I was late because I had to apologize to someone I hurt." Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Excuse me? I was rushing here. I was stressed and scared. I bumped into a stranger on the street. I was rude to him, actually. I did worse than rude. I slapped him." The manager's eyes went wide. He stared at her in complete shock. You assaulted someone?" "Yes," Jenny said, hanging her head. "It was a terrible moment of anger. I walked away, but then I realized what I had done. I realized he was a person just trying to get through his day just like me. So I went back, I found him, and I apologized. It took 20 minutes, but it was the right thing to do." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I missed our appointment because I was fixing a mistake. If I had come here on time, I would have been on time, but I would have been a person who hits strangers and walks away. I didn't want to be that person anymore." The room was silent. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Mr. Henderson looked at the crumpled resume, then back at Jenny. The sternness had left his face. He looked thoughtful, maybe even a little impressed. "Honesty is rare," he said slowly, "and taking responsibility is even rarer. Most people would have blamed the traffic. I did blame the traffic in my head," Jenny admitted with a small, sad smile. "But I knew it wasn't true." Mr. Henderson picked up her resume. He smoothed it out with his hand. "I can't ignore the fact that you were late, Jenny. This job requires punctuality." "I know," she said. "But," he continued, looking at her closely, "it also requires integrity. It requires the ability to handle difficult situations and fix problems when they go wrong. It sounds like you did that today." He looked at the red mark on her cheek where she had been crying and the dirt smudge. He saw a fighter. He saw someone who didn't give up even when things went wrong. "I have a lot of resumes here," he said, "people with perfect attendance and fancy suits. But I don't know if they have the character you showed today." He tapped the paper. I'm going to give you a chance, not because you're the most qualified on paper, but because you came back. We need people who come back. Jenny felt the tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. I won't let you down. Don't be late tomorrow, he said, but he was smiling now. I won't, she promised. She walked out of the office 10 minutes later with a probationary contract in her bag. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky as she stepped out of the building. The heat was breaking, replaced by a soft, cool breeze. The city looked beautiful. The lights were starting to twinkle on the horizon. Jenny stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. She pulled out her phone. She had a message from her brother. Dad is doing okay today. He was asking about you. She typed back a reply, I'm coming to see him. I got the job. She hailed a taxi this time. She didn't need to walk. As the cab drove along the coast road, passing the promenade, she looked out the window. She scanned the benches and the paths. She didn't see him. The gray hoodie was gone. The bench was empty. But that was okay. He wasn't a fairy godfather who was going to appear and wave a magic wand. He was just a man who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, or maybe the wrong place at the right time. He had given her a moment of grace, and she had taken it. The taxi driver turned on the radio. An old rock song was playing, something classic and upbeat. Jenny leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She thought about the red mark on his cheek. She hoped he was okay. She hoped that wherever he was tonight, the heavy things he was carrying felt just a little bit lighter. She knew she would probably never see him again. She would never get to thank him properly, never get to buy him a coffee or explain how much that 10-minute conversation meant to her. But she decided she would pay it forward. The next time she saw someone having a bad day, the next time someone was rude or impatient, she would remember the bench. She would remember that everyone is fighting a battle she knows nothing about. The cab pulled up to the hospital. Jenny paid the driver and stepped out. The air smelled like antiseptic and flowers, but to her it smelled like hope. She walked through the sliding doors, her head held high. She wasn't perfect. She had made mistakes today. But she had fixed them. She was learning. And as she walked toward her father's room, she smiled for the first time all day. It was a real smile. She was ready for whatever came next.